and I'll review the chat while you do that. So Alicia, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Student housing marketplace, cool. Marketplaces can be challenging, but we can certainly talk more about that as well. And a few other people are starting. So let's start off with, what do you think? Why should we do research when starting or growing a business? Would love to hear some thoughts in the chat from everyone, not just the students. So why do research when starting or growing a business?
I guess.
Is it Mateus?
Yep. Yep.
Understand consumer demand. Love that. William, build best target an audience that wants your product or service. Absolutely. I see, I think, a couple raised hands. I don't know if those are current or not, but if they are, feel free to unmute. I see Alicia and Hamza, I believe.
I was going to say, that way you know your target audience, and you know who is going to be needing your business or using your services and who's not.
Hamza, I believe that was you. Your microphone quality is not coming through clearly. Okay. Any other thoughts? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, to save yourself time and failed processes, I think doing your research first saves you the time and effort of going down paths that won't actually work out.
Yes. Yeah. Very good. Your volume is a little bit low, Alicia, just in case there's opportunity to change that, but I did get that. So in case anyone didn't hear her, she said basically not to run down the wrong path, which is fantastic. Anybody else? I think Hamza is writing an essay. We'll keep an eye on that. So really foundationally, when we do research, it's all about making a decision. We're trying to figure out something. And as both Mateus and William and Alicia related, it's all aligned with that. And so Mateus gave the specific example around consumer demand. William said around audience. So absolutely, those are certainly components, but it's all about driving towards, should we do this? Should we not do it? And some things are more trite and some things are much more serious in terms of the level of time, effort, money that are going to be involved. Oh, and there's Hamza who's saying it allows you to know who will be in your target audience and use your services and who would not. Absolutely. So I think we've got a really good orientation on sort of the consumer side of this, which is great. So in terms of what should we consider? At the very top level, we really want to think about, what is it that we're trying to assess? What are we trying to understand? And what does that mean for us in the long run? And then we need to think about, what sources of information do I have available? And so primary research versus secondary research. Primary is really talking to other people. And then secondary is using published information. Now, of course, primary can look different. It doesn't mean necessarily that you have to meet in person with someone anymore. It could be that you do a Zoom call or a Teams call, or you are messaging with them over text or on LinkedIn, whatever it might be. So what sources of information? This is a really important checkpoint. If you've already made up your mind, don't waste time in doing research. I had a client once who, they were going through this whole exercise of, should we acquire this other company? And we kept spinning our tail. And then finally we were like, well, are you just going to acquire the other company no matter what? And the person said, well, yeah. It's like, okay, so why did we waste all this time talking about all these different approaches and constructs? Because you've already made up your mind. So That's really important, is to look at the decision. Has it already been made? And really what matters. So as you think about any kind of decision you're trying to make, if you can figure out what does good look like versus bad, or breaking things down into more of a checklist, like I will do it if it meets the following criteria: A, B, C. If you have that opportunity to break it out into much more sort of tangible sub criteria where you can basically go out and validate, like, okay, I got the information and against criteria A, it's no. Good. You just said you might have saved yourself a bunch of time by figuring out, okay, it's really the wrong path, as Alicia had shared. So um, we're not going to do it. So the more that you can think about that in this way, because the worst thing you want to do is spend a whole bunch of time working on the business and not in it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, that means you're not making money, you're not paying the bills. So there's a balance to be achieved there. So um, I'll probably hate myself for this question. How many people were born before 1999? If you can put it in the chat, please. You can just type me if that's Emily was, okay. Rebecca, okay. Okay, we have more people and Don coming in with the emoji, like it. Only staff, okay. William, well, I see some dots coming. How many people were born after 1999? Teus was 2002. Hamza, 3 years too late. Okay. So I just throw that out there just for fun. But so this is an actual true story. In my grade 9 English class, in 1999, I thought of online grocery shopping. I'm curious, from your perspective, why am I not a billionaire? And what are the issues that you think I faced in terms of taking that idea through to actualization? William says, too early. Explain yourself, William. Lack of compatible tech, Alicia says. Unpack that a little bit more, Alicia. William says market wasn't ready, not enough demand. Maybe. Okay. Alicia says consumer knowledge on tech. Okay. Computers were not as affordable. Absolutely correct. Did these exist? Largely not. Yeah, Emily, exactly. A lot of folks still weren't on email. Smartphones were non-existent. Internet was new, thought of as a fad. The internet, interestingly, was actually invented, I think, in 19. I'm gonna have to fact check myself. 1950s, anyway. But yeah, the speed was insufficient for sure. Yes, well, not commercially, exactly. It was not ubiquitous, and so as we think about my question here in context, and you've hit on a number of factors. So the technology piece, certainly, tech wasn't there. In 1999, I'm going to guess that I had a 28K or maybe a 56K modem. Um, Again, for us all now, we could never live with that, because downloading, we couldn't even do this call on that sort of speed. So um, technology wasn't there. The timing factor was mentioned in the chat. Absolutely. Like all of these different factors, which are external factors about the business, a lot of them just weren't there. And so it's really important as you consider whatever the business is that you are working towards, or maybe you're already in, what are the factors both inside the business and outside the business that can impact you? And this is just sort of a highlight of different factors. But if you don't understand both kind of what's happening in the environment, what your risk factors are, that sort of thing, that can have a massive impact on your business. So as a real world example, there was a caviar company located in New Brunswick, and you can look this up online. It's called Breviro Caviar, Breviro, I believe. And basically, they went out and spent millions of dollars and got their operation up and all of that sort of thing. But they didn't understand the combination of the go-to-market piece as well as the regulatory and legal, which was their whole plan was predicated on, well, we're going to sell to the U.S. market. Problem being for that company that it was actually their product was barred from the US because it would be potentially an invasive species considered by the EPA. So again, here were people spending multiple millions of dollars on a business, and they didn't understand fully sort of what the plan was and why, and is that a good idea? So for any business, really, it's important to be thinking about different factors. And look, when you're doing your research, it has to tell a convincing story. And so you might be facing real world questions like, should I invest time and money into this idea that I have? Um, I think customers want this type of product. Is that a good idea? I'm currently working through that journey right now myself. Working on a product for enable leaders, which I have a theory that it's going to be very beneficial, but I'm doing my research, a lot of primary research, and engaging with people that I think can benefit from it. And just always be careful of this phrase, no one does what I do. I've heard it far too many times where somebody will say, oh, well, there's no one like me. And meanwhile, that's in my experience in dealing with thousands of entrepreneurs, that's maybe true like 1 out of every 2,000, maybe. So just again, you need to be aware of what's sort of happening in your environment. So let's just pause there for a quick second. Any questions so far or comments, contributions you'd like to make? You can either come off mute or put it in the chat.
Jonathan, could you give an example of a business that might think it doesn't have competition, but does? Because even the status quo is competition, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Look, I'm actually doing a session, and I would certainly welcome any of you to join. I think I put it out today on my LinkedIn. I'm doing a session in a couple of weeks, October 5th, about competitors specifically. To wit, I would say every business has some form of competition. As Don said, doing status quo, changing nothing, that is real world threats. So really, no matter the type of business. So like, let's say that you are a farmer, or you're trying to sell to farmers, as an example. You might say, hey, I have this revolutionary technology. It's going to make things so much easier for you to track all your day to day because you're writing everything on paper right now, and that's inefficient and dangerous and all kinds of liabilities. The reality is people will choose things based on criteria. Doesn't necessarily mean that it makes sense from your perspective, at least, but every business, I would suggest, has some level of competition, ranging from um, direct substitutes, so ketchup and relish, to direct competitors, ketchup versus ketchup. So that's a real world depiction. Did that address your question, Don?
Yeah, I love that analogy, like being able to distinguish ketchup and relish, because I think it's a relish that's sometimes hard to identify. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, are folks familiar with the concept of jobs to be done? You can put it in the chat if you've heard of that before. Just going to quickly pull down a YouTube link. Peyton Christensen. If you haven't heard of it before, that's okay. There's lots of people that have not heard of it. But definitely take a look at this after the session. This is called the milkshake. It's very topical to what we're talking about. Any other questions before we move on? Or contributions?
Not necessarily a question, but I really like the first bullet point you have there is the should I invest like 100,000 of my own money is how I interpret that, because I think like a lot of the time it's easy to like, I don't know, when you have like capital sources or like, you know, like it's a lot of going to investors maybe and asking them to support your business, but like, do you believe in it enough that like you would bet like your money?
Yeah.
I think that kind of puts like the strength of your idea into perspective. So I appreciate that point.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Alicia. And certainly, if you are not adequately convinced in the business itself, you should not be asking investors to invest in you. That would be my perspective. So we want to come back to that idea of, again, research must tell a convincing story. So how do we get to that story? And I'm going to suggest to you, it's really all about building data. We need to start with the right questions. And so an example here, rather, I'm a big box retailer and I want to move into Canada from the US. I already have a good operation. What should I know? So if you were advising the CEO of this company, whom we shall name very soon, what questions should they be asking? If you can put those in the chat, please, that'd be great. Or you can also come off mute, either way. Again, what questions would you advise the CEO of a big box retailer? So think of Walmarts of the world, or Kmart, or Zellers, depending on your vintage. Home Depot's also big box. So Michael says, who are the competitors in Canada? Absolutely, that's a good foundational question.
Not just competitors, but like how do you like match up, like how are you positioned in the minds of consumers already? Because like the thing that comes to mind for me is Target moving into Canada. And I don't think you guys had Target in New Brunswick, but I had it in Ontario for a short time. And I felt like consumer perception was this whole big like, oh, Target of America is amazing. And like Target kind of had to live up to this expectation that in reality, when it was actually initiated in Ontario, it was just kind of like any other retailer, which I think, I don't know, like perceptions and existing reputation as well.
So your questions then to the CEO would be things like what?
What does that audience already know about your brand? What do they associate your brand with? Are their competitors already doing that, or are they going to value your business as being of greater value, or things like that?
Right. Okay. I can buy that. Thank you.
I don't know. Is my mic good right now?
Well, Hamza, unfortunately, your mic quality is still not great. Sorry. The joys of technology. So Alicia had a contribution. William had a contribution. I see lots of other names here in the chat that I haven't seen contributing just yet. So give it your best guess. There are no wrong answers here. Hamza, thank you. So what kind of research you've done on the region? Okay. And within that research, Hamza, what questions should the CEO be able to answer? That would be my reply to you. Mateus says, what is your goal and where do you want the company to be in 5 years? That can certainly be a good sort of strategic visioning piece. Absolutely. Oh, Emily's getting down to brass tacks. How will you manage fulfillment? Who are your suppliers? Taxes? Good questions. Hamza, how do you plan to use it? How do you plan using it to your advantage? Okay. Good. Seeing some new names in there. Is it Kalen or is that the proper pronunciation?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, perfect. What are the potential differences in demand for the actual products being sold? Potential differences in demand for the products being sold. Okay, good question. Product demand side. I'll give you about 15 more seconds for anybody else that wants to jump in. These are all good.
Jonathan, while we're waiting, one of the names that you're seeing there should introduce to you. So Emily Sanford has just joined our team, and she's our new career services coordinator.
Wonderful. Nice to meet you, Emily.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, we won't belabor the point. So again, I want to bring you back to the frame. So when we're thinking about this, and this is really applicable to all businesses. So at the beginning, this is really about what are the questions. So that's why I was asking and prompting you on that. We also need to think about what is the end. So what is the data piece of this? How did we ideally want this to appear? What shape is that going to be? Like we talked about earlier in terms of criteria, if you have criteria, that can make your life so much easier in terms of determining how many hours am I going to need to put into this? Is this a 5-minute thing or a 5-year thing? It could be vastly different. And as you think about information, think about sort of this idea of clusters or groups and then sub questions. So, and really what we're talking about there is just knowledge in general. So a cluster might be like if I were looking at things about, say, Cove kombucha, it might be kombucha as a whole. That's one big cluster, and then we could break out into flavors and probiotics and can mechanisms or how it's consumed, production, environmental impact, different sorts of things, and then we could go down to sub factors even from that. So just again, as you think through from a knowledge perspective, that can be really immensely helpful in terms of as you're trying to go from start to finish on a project, how best to organize and construct knowledge. And last point on the third piece here is think about how to differently represent what you're trying to understand. So like in the prompt here that I gave, it's soda versus pop versus liquid. If you're trying to really understand, like I've got a mom and pop, pun not intended, but a small pop operation that I'm trying to grow within Canada, and you're trying to understand market potential, these might all be different ways in which you could represent to understand what that market potential is. And again, I've mentioned this a few times, but if you can build up criteria, your life will be so much easier. So Alicia was apparently behind the scenes. She might have compromised my computer. I don't know. Alicia, will you confess to this?
Just a big Target supporter here, and
Just
was
a
very
big
sad when they
Target
left.
fan. Well, there was one in Moncton for your information. I don't know if there was anyone else there, but it's now in the Canadian Tire location on Mountain Road. So it was there, and Zellers was there before that, ironically. So um, in this example, so I was prompting you and asking you about what sorts of questions should we be looking at, and so these are just this is a quick sketch on real estate and logistics. There's probably 50 to 75 more pertinent questions that you can imagine in real estate and logistics. And that's just that piece. Earlier, we had mentioned of fulfillment, taxes, customer demand, brand, all kinds of good contributions, competitors. Um, so this is just real estate and logistics. As if you think about sort of across the fold, and again, this is just a few highlighted areas where you would want to have some research to be able to tell your story with confidence. There's a lot of areas to be addressed here, and rightfully so, because Target was a massive company. There were 133 stores ultimately that closed in Canada after just 2 years, um, due to various factors. And there's the quick snip from CNBC, but really 4 bullet points are tech, timing, renovations, and leadership. Um, Look, I think largely they tried to roll in far too quickly, not understanding the environment fully, not being able to translate that experience that US Target had to Canada, because I would argue, had they done a good job of translating the same experience, because they would have done much better. One of the big points of friction that I observed was people would often lament, just in my own circles, Target's so much more expensive here than it was in the US. So not understanding that as a barrier and a point of friction um, was a big issue. And could they have made strategic adjustments in order to do a better job to drive out costs? Probably. So bit of a missed opportunity. um, just before we jump to that, I will pause. Any questions, thoughts? I know we've got till about 2:30, so.
I have one.
Yeah.
So our students, some folks here are working on a product-based business, some on a service-based business. So in your experience, do the lines of questioning vary when you think about product versus service businesses?
Absolutely. Yeah. What I would suggest is I'm just going to go back to this piece here. So really, no matter what, if you're doing a product-based business or a service-based business, there's a reason why there are asterisks on customers, because ultimately at the end of the day, you can have the best product in the world, but if your customers don't care, don't want it, don't need it, won't buy it, then it doesn't matter. And so from a question perspective, ultimately, yeah, your context is going to change. And of course, there's going to be hyper specifics. So if you're dealing in rare metals versus offering legal services, obviously you're going to ask different questions. But foundationally, you have to understand some of the basic elements of running a business. So um, can I give what is valuable to my customers? Yes. Okay, good. Can I give that to them in a way that makes money? That also has to be answered well. It does and connected with that money making part is, what is the business model that supports me being able to provide these services and or products? Um, and then all these other elements of, again, across here, legal, competition, tech, there's all interplay depending on what it is that you're doing. But really foundational is the piece of understanding, will a customer buy this? And particularly from an entrepreneurial perspective, as you're trying to figure that out, it's how can I prove that out with really expending the least amount of capital possible? So and you'll get a range of suggestions from, just build a visual to build, some sort of prototype. I I'm a big fan of, for at least product-based businesses, building what I would call a minimum lovable product. So minimum viable product suggests like it's going to be bare bones, but bare bones experience doesn't always translate to customers getting it and being enthusiastic and being happy about it. Whereas a minimum lovable product it's your MVP plus. So it allows people to have a closer to reality experience, to engage with it and that sort of thing. Um, with service-based business, look, at the end of the day, again, um, do they value what you can offer, and can you do that for a price that makes sense? Um, those foundationally are two massive questions you have to be able to address. Alicia, the L is lovable. Yes, as Don just put in. Great question. Any other questions? All right. So keep rolling. Apologies for the visual onslaught. So William was kind enough to provide some background on what he's working on. So we're going to use this as a little bit of fodder, and I'll give you a second to review what's on the slide here. And if you can just write done in the chat when you're done, that'd be great. Okay, thank you, Alicia and Mateus. Perfect. Thank you, Hamza. Give you about 20 to 30 more seconds, and then we'll move on. All right. So in short, basically what William is looking at is a 3D printing company that can provide prototypes and maybe something beyond prototypes for metal manufacturers, including aerospace and that sort of thing. So that's a very high level overview. So I want to ask you, what assumptions are present? Even in this statement, there are some assumptions. So just give me your quick view of what those are in the chat, or you can come off mute. What assumptions are you seeing and hearing in this? Love to see maybe from Tova and Reese and Bennett and Leston, I believe, if I'm properly pronouncing this? William, we'll just wait a moment so we don't bias others in with what you already have in your head. Yeah, so high cost of entry makes it inaccessible. That is certainly an assumption. Or as I'm sure you've heard in your business classes, a barrier to entry. Any other thoughts? Product works, product is comparable enough that it'd be seen as a close enough substitute to the higher cost alternative. Yes, certainly in this realm, quality and quality is a massive thing. I used to work for an aerospace company, interestingly enough, so familiar. Any other thoughts? Maybe about 5 seconds. Yes, Don, that people would want to change. Absolutely. Assumes there's a market. Yep, all good. And William, don't worry. You and I will talk directly about your assumptions when we meet. So in general, we're not going to interrogate this too much in depth, but at the top level, William has a thesis, which is really about they haven't adopted this because it's too expensive. And so within this idea of, as we talked about, service-based businesses or even product-based businesses, what's sort of interesting about this particular business is it has an opportunity to maybe be a little bit of both. So if he is looking to provide the 3D printers, that's a different business than if he buys the 3D printers and provides services. And there could be sort of an opportunity there in a couple different ways. So, but anytime when you start sort of the research process, you have a thesis, you have an idea about something. And so step 2, as you go down the ladder here, is really we need to validate or invalidate that. So is this true? In this case, sort of what solutions are out there? I was talking to somebody the other day about basically a software solution, and there were other folks in play for that customer already. So, if your thesis was, oh, well, no one's servicing them, very quickly you find out, oh, no, actually, they're quite down the road with one of our competitors, and we've already missed the boat, at least for now. So, again, it's all about figuring out, is this true? Not. When we go to the third level down, so research, if you are new to an industry, it's so vital that you get up to speed on what that is. And depending on the industry, so I've been very fortunate in my career. I've worked across countless industries. Some of them are very difficult to understand. I did a project once on catheter labs for hearts. I don't know much about cardiology, to be honest, but I had to get quickly up to speed, or as quickly as I could, on that topic. So it's so key to really get immersed in that. And um, again, if you're going from zero knowledge on the industry, you want to figure out ways to kind of shortcut that learning as much as possible. So that's great. And then start with secondary, look at secondary research, and then primary, and talk to folks, get up to speed, ask good questions, share that you're trying to learn more about the industry that you're wanting to play in, because there may be some really key nuances that you say, look, based on what I want to do or based on the business that I have and where I want to take it, like that's not a fit. Good. You just saved a lot of time probably and money. So we go thesis, invalidate, and then we move to actually doing some research. And as we do that research, we need to understand the story. And I'm a big fan of, is there pain? Because where there's pain, typically that means that somebody is willing to change. Human behavior, as we talked about earlier, why are people going to want to change and adopt a solution? That is so, so key. And if you can find enough pain and bring a solution to that, then you probably have something. When we look at sort of the methodology perspective, as you're talking to people, really I've got 2 questions listed here, but they're all kinds of questions. But again, we're looking for the story. We're looking for, how do people work? What are they running into? What are the pain points? What are the challenges? So what does an average day look like? If you could wave a magic wand and change anything, what would it be? Those are really great questions to ask. And as you start to get answers on that, pull at the threads. So if somebody says, well, within a university context, let's say, you go and talk to Rebecca, and you say, Rebecca, what would make your life easier? And as she describes her day, you might hear something really interesting for your solution. You go, tell me more about that. And you sort of extend that conversation down until you get to the end of the road, and then you go, okay, great. And then you come back to sort of where you were and then continue to go. So that's really what I mean by pulling at threads. It's exploring things and documenting that as best as possible as you're going through the primary research process. And connected with that is the next step down, which is code and capture your data. So there are tools like Otter AI and others that incorporate with Zoom. That's OTTER.ai. That'll do automatic transcriptions, among many others. That's going to save you time. So that's probably a worthwhile investment. Thank you for that, Dawn. And then as we start to get more and more interviews, we're going to build that together. So you can build the data set. And as you code and then you get volume within the code, and think back to sort of that clusters idea, as you start to see themes and trends emerge within the data, that's really when you can start to go, oh, hey, I thought, go back to William's example, I thought that manufacturers needed this, but what I'm really hearing as a pain point is that they need better visibility on metal quality before they buy it. That could be a very real world thing. So again, that's where you can start to look for trends and themes. And then ultimately, we need to make a decision. So fundamentally, we're doing research to answer something. So that's really, we get through the end of that. You look at the data, you sort of put it down and say, okay, I designed a good process. I thought through the different questions. Here's what the data is saying to me. Let's go and make the decision. Just pause there quickly. Any questions, comments, theories?
Jonathan, if I could just
Yes.
tie this a little bit to kind of the work that students do as students, right, in their academic life. I think one of the challenges of market research is that it's an inductive process. So very often when you're writing a paper or report as a student, you start with a theory that you've learned in class, and then you kind of demonstrate how that applies, and you provide evidence to back up your theory. So theory is that the war in Ukraine was caused by such and such, and here's my evidence. But when you're doing market research, it's flipped, right? And like I would say, folks who have maybe are in some upper level courses, and they've looked at things like grounded, what's it called, grounded theory, like where you let the evidence actually kind of shape the categories and the as you say, the insights that you get. It's kind of a shift, I think, for many students.
Yeah, and I think there can actually be a little bit of interplay between the two ends of that spectrum. So, um, like this, to be very clear, this is not linear and this is not neat and tidy, and that's one of the big challenges. And so, oftentimes it's starting with, at least from my view of the world, it's starting with some sort of fundamental question. Um, Maybe rather than an assertion, but you could also start with an assertion. If you look at, like, technology is a great realm where you look at people who have made bets, and some of them have been right, some of them have been wrong. Look at Quibi, over $10 billion of investment. They made an assertion that they wanted to try and validate, to say, we believe that short form content is going to be the next big thing. We see evidence from YouTube, so we're going to try and use that modus operandi, and or that frame, and pursue a business in that realm. Um, Only thing was, they couldn't translate to actual subscriptions after free. So their customer acquisition strategy needed work, their pricing model needed some work. There were multiple points of failure there. So, um, yeah, back to what you were saying. Sometimes I think it's question based, sometimes it's assertion based. So you could find yourself perhaps at either kind of level. But the process, as much as it is a process, it's sort of messy, but it will follow the same sort of intervals, I would suggest.
I think that's so helpful, Jonathan. Thank you. And I think that the idea that genuine research is messy, right? That's so important. And again, very different from writing a paper for a class.
Well, I do want to tie into that, though. There's a lot of good parallels between writing a good paper and doing good market research. Because with a good paper, there's a foundation, there's some assertions, there's some assumptions, then you give evidence to that, and then you wrap it up. And I would suggest to you, if you can do that well in a paper, you can translate that well to your market research efforts. You're going to be head and shoulders above other people who are not doing that. So thank you for that. Okay, I know we've got about 5 minutes, and I'm happy to stick around for additional Q&A. So just some tips. The art of creating an argument, absolutely. Because really, this is a business argument. You are making an assertion, an assumption, to say, I believe it's this because. And boiled down, that's a really good frame. So in terms of some additional process and wrap up tips, I have a serious hate on for surveys because most of us are really terrible at putting them together for a whole variety of reasons. Have conversations, look through industry publications, get information from different ways, but surveys are most likely going to lead you down the wrong path. 30 minutes of a good conversation with the right person can be worth 30 hours of secondary research. That's my experience. But to be able to have that conversation, you have to have enough foundational knowledge in the industry to be able to effectively question and interrogate that. So that's really key. If you don't know an industry well, you've got to get up to speed. When is enough research enough? I'm going to suggest to you when you can see consistency in the data. So you don't need to go and interview typically 5,000 people, but you need to interview the right people, and to pull in information from secondary sources that give you some guardrails and guide rails on this. We mentioned the transcription tools already. We mentioned coding of your data as well. This was a question that was shared before, and I will emphasize this. Customer interviews is not the same as selling. So do not get the two confused. I had a client once that was very confused about this process, and I made them sit in the corner, and I told them explicitly, say absolutely nothing. No questions, nothing, because I knew the person would bias what was going on, and I just needed them to hear what the customers were saying or the prospective customers were saying. And it was really a wealth of information that came out in that interview. Look, if you have not been on a good date recently, my sympathies, but much like a good date, when you are doing primary research, ask them about themselves. Don't ideally flip to, well, I'm building a solution that can do X, Y, and Z right out of the gate, because already you will have biased the conversation. So if you can focus on the customer, sort of maybe a high level introduction of like, this is what I'm working on, just to give some context, but then not so much as to bias them. That's really helpful. People in industry are busy. Come with intelligent questions, and not everybody's going to help you. That's okay. Just be persistent. You might not be able to meet in person, but virtually, we talked about social and email and otherwise already. Use the networks that you have. Get warm introductions. Use the Mount A Alumni Network. Use associations, which is my next point. Engage with folks that want to see you be successful and to learn about industry and to get connected with other similar folks. It can be church groups or nonprofit groups or whatever sort of circles you're part of. Use those and think about how you can leverage those connections. A few resources, and I'll share this after with you, that you can definitely check out on customer discovery. These are two really great starting points. Caitlin Burgoyne's actually from Nova Scotia. And Emily, nice plug there in the chat from Don. Emily's apparently got some upcoming workshops and using LinkedIn, so fantastic. Take advantage of that. Yeah, and with all of 1 minute to spare, so as we talked about, I'm currently building Enable Leaders. And yes, I'm eating my own dog food. So would absolutely love to connect a few of you. I've already set up some time with. Happy to take some time and walk through your specific questions, whether it's and about your business or your business idea to help you in your journey. My email is there at the bottom, jonathan@enableleaders.com, and more than happy to share what I know. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Alicia. I appreciate your time, and I'm going to stop presenting here. Any questions at all that anybody has in the room? And I'd certainly welcome the fact as well, if you have questions later that you think of that you wish you would have asked, just send me an email, and I'm more than happy to work through that with you.
Jonathan, thank you so much. That was just fantastic.
My pleasure.
I think there's a lot of food for thought here, and certainly we have students here who are far enough into their business idea that they should really be able to benefit from them. Please, if you are serious about starting any kind of an entrepreneurial venture, take advantage of this opportunity to get some one-on-one time with Jonathan. And I would say also, if you could, send me a quick email to let me know what your biggest takeaway was from today's session and what questions you're left with, because we are lining up other entrepreneurs of the month, other sessions, and we really want to make sure that we are targeting the kinds of topics that will be really helpful to you. So thank you again so much, Jonathan. I'm glad you can see the whole ELCD team here. So I hope we'll all stay connected.
Absolutely. Again, so in terms of booking time with me, just reach out to me by email. I have, unfortunately, too many emails, so that's just the easiest way to do it for me. So please send me a note. I'm more than happy to help you. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. I hope you found it to be beneficial and helpful.
Okay, have a good rest of the day, everyone. Bye.
And I'm happy to hang around for a minute or two if there's any questions that you want to ask as well. So thanks, everyone.
Jonathan, that was just wonderful. I will follow up later today with some paperwork, so
Okay.
we'll make sure we take care of that part.
Sure.
And yeah, talk soon.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Well, thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone. Have a good day.